Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, we have Italian earthquakes increasing, protests in Indonesia, and the threat of nuclear war. And of course, a lot of people are wondering, is it time to build a bunker? Yeah, to keep themselves safe. Yeah. Well, those are just a few of the topics in today's broadcast, but we first start off with an earthquake that struck central and southern Italy. It was a powerful 6.6 in magnitude. The epicenter of the quake was 6 kilometers north of the town of Norcia. The tremor was also felt in the capital, Rome, and destroyed many buildings. Aftershocks are expected to last for several weeks. Fabrizio Curio, the head of the National Civil Protection, said they have 6 aircraft that will take part in search and rescue efforts, along with teams from all across Italy.
Italy's prime minister addressed the nation in the wake of all the destruction. This area is still recovering from an earthquake that shook the region in August that killed nearly 300 people. Now, there were also more powerful tremors, so many that people had already been evacuated. Now, a 14th century basilica was destroyed, and the nuns there had to be escorted to safety by the fire brigade.
And those buildings over there are heavily constructed, so when pieces fall, they come in really big chunks.
A lot of stone, a lot of brick, and so forth.
That's right. Brian Baptiste, a seismologist, said that typically the aftershocks are smaller than the main tremor, but it's not impossible for those to trigger larger events. Well, it's possible for activity to continue in this region for many more months. This was the biggest earthquake felt in Italy. With the increase in quakes, it has many wondering, when will the next one be?
Well, 12 months after its adoption, the Paris Agreement on climate change is now entering into force. 195 nations came into agreement to work together to address the global climate change. The goal? To limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. Now, this is a pre-industrial level that they're hoping to get to, and it's said that it's a critical tipping point for food production and more frequent and dangerous weather events such as flooding and drought. So they're trying to say if they can curb that 2 degrees, they can control these other freak weather incidents that we're having.
Which we have seen on the rise in the last few years. Absolutely. Here. For the nations, getting multiple nations to agree on a multilateral agreement and putting it into force, they're using this word force here, less than a year is almost unprecedented. With this agreement, each country must submit its own plan for reduced greenhouse gases. The agreement as a whole isn't legally binding and doesn't penalize countries for failing to meet the agreement, but it does include a process to shame them into compliance.
Ajay Bombeer of the Imperial College London said there is a special article dedicated to the global stock take. This is very much the start of a period where each country's actions are going to be scrutinized and reflected upon. To achieve the agreement's goal to limiting the temperature to 2 degrees Celsius, there'll need to be a reduction in carbon emissions by some estimates of 70% by 2050, the year 2050, and that the planet will need to be carbon neutral by 2100. So they seem like they have a plan laid out, but interesting that they're going to start trying to punish the countries that are not participating.
Right, shame them. Interesting,
yes.
Yeah. Current plans fall short of reaching that goal. The job begins with hundreds of engineers, researchers, and scientists who will be discussing ways to accelerate and intensify the move towards a sustainable, low-carbon future. Innovations and technology that's essential if the Paris Agreement is to live up to its promise.
The European Parliament also endorses the Paris Climate Pact, voting overwhelmingly 610 for, 38 against, and 31 abstentions in favor of the EU's fast-tracked ratification of the climate deal accepted last December. Now, the EU plans to hand over its plans to the United Nations. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, "I look forward to the Paris Agreement entering into force as soon as possible, even in just a few days' time."
Interesting. Well, Larry McGee has the details for us concerning the nation's latest terror threat and terror taking place overseas. Larry, what do you have for us?
As one of the most important days in American democracy descends, there has ironically come along with it alleged threats of potential terrorism in 3 major U.S. cities. U.S. intelligence has reportedly notified the Joint Terrorism Task Force that al-Qaeda could be formulating plans to potentially strike New York, Virginia, and Texas, though credibility with regard to the claims are admittedly still under investigation. Government officials are said to be taking the threat serious nonetheless and are preparing for a number of worst-case scenarios. Communication to local law enforcement agencies has reportedly been sent concerning possible attacks at polling stations carried out by individuals regarded as lone wolves motivated by violent extremist ideologies. The FBI is said to be cooperating closely with the Department of Homeland Security and other state and federal agencies to disrupt and identify any potential threats. Threats are also emanating from protesters in Jakarta following a controversial comment made by the city's governor, Basuki Purnama, who was reportedly a Christian. One protester stated that the group's message was clear: if the governor is not declared a suspect immediately, then they will not stop until it happens. He commented further that they urged Muslims all across Indonesia to rise up in their own region. The demonstration is said to have drawn 50,000 people who all marched on the presidential palace in protest to an insult reportedly leveled from the governor against the Quran. Governor Purnama is said to have apologized, but he is still currently under investigation. Afghan citizens are calling for investigations concerning recent NATO airstrikes, which left dozens dead and scores injured. In the forgotten war zone of Afghanistan, death is said to be all around, consuming even the lives of small children, more of which were killed in the recent strikes. Citizens say ordinary people were sleeping in their homes. The Taliban attacked Kunduz, and then the bombs came. They stated that all night the planes were bombing, and up to 50 people were injured. One man's question was, what did the children who lost their lives do wrong? He and many others are calling for justice. America has acknowledged conducting strikes of its own to shield forces carrying out an operation in Kunduz, which recently suffered 2 casualties. The city of Kunduz is said to be situated in one of many of Afghanistan's hotspots. The Taliban has reportedly taken brief control of the city on 2 occasions, and they are now said to have great influence in the city, and the residents fear that they will ultimately be back in numbers. Locals are said to be hemmed in by death coming from NATO in the air and the Taliban on the ground. Secretary Ashton Carter says the U.S. is in Afghanistan to help secure the country, but the citizens of Afghanistan have lost confidence in that assertion, and they are now shouting, "Death to America." For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Tom, these Afghan bombings have been going on for so many years, but still no progress is being made there, no changes.
Yeah, sad.
Well, Qusam Soleimani, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander, raised concerns in Washington over his recent visit to Moscow. It is thought that he was there possibly finalizing a deal with the Russians to purchase their advanced S-300 air defense missile system.
Under UN resolutions, the sale is legal. However, the State Department isn't backing down. In a press conference, Tim Kirby told reporters, "We've been making very clear our objection to any sale of this missile system to Iran. As I've said for quite some time, and will continue to say, we will continue to monitor it closely."
If Iran had the S-300 system in place, it would mean that U.S. and Israeli warplanes could not carry out a surprise attack on Iran's nuclear weapon sites because, of course, they could be detected.
Right.
And the bombing, and if they chose to bomb the S-300 radars, and the missiles first, well, that would give the Iranians warning of any such attack. So they feel now if they have this defense system in place, their element of surprise is taken away.
Right, right. Michael O'Hanlon from the Brookings Institute tells reporters that the situation will become tenser in the air. He says the airspace will be filled up with more radar beams, if you will, invisible and yet even more present, and they will be radar signals that we can't easily stop or evade.
There's also the prospect that the Iranian deal will not pass in Congress, but the Obama administration is trying to push it through. Obama recently said, by killing this deal, Congress would not merely pave Iran's pathway to a bomb, it would accelerate it. Now, Obama also knows that sanctions on Iran would not hold, saying, we cannot dictate the foreign economic and energy policies of every major power in the world.
The U.S. would certainly lose credibility with international partners. John Kerry agrees with the president, warning those in offices, we turn around and nix the deal and then tell them you're going to have to obey our rules on the sanctions anyway. That is a recipe very quickly, my friends, business people here, for the American dollar to cease to be the reserve currency of the world. And of course, that's going to affect a lot of people's pocketbooks.
Right. And that's not all, Katan. The allies would walk away from U.S. on other issues as well, like Ukraine. Now, all of this comes as 5,000 troops from the U.S. and NATO are conducting the largest airborne training exercise in Europe since the Cold War, making sure that they're ready for a battle at any moment.
Oh, interesting. Well, Russia is also showing its military might these days. Russian warships have traveled to the Mediterranean Sea, causing quite a stir in the West. The 8 warships are led by Russia's aircraft carrier called Admiral Kuznetsov. Russia has not given any official word on their mission, but the ships are moving toward the Syrian coast just north of Lebanon.
United States officials have been concerned about Russian aggression. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, after hearing the news, stated, we will see whether the Russians have a greater desire to bomb Aleppo into smithereens. Well, that response was met with a rebuttal from the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, when he said, it is time for our Western colleagues to determine who they are fighting against, terrorists or Russia.
Experts on Moscow say that the very presence of the fleet in that region will enhance Russia's existing military operations in Syria, including anti-missile and anti-aircraft defense systems. However, the move has once again continued to strain relations between U.S. and Russia.
Now, the relation between these two superpowers has hit such a low that it's beyond a Cold War. Now, a few key issues have brought the U.S. and Russia to this point. Back in 2014, the U.S. and its European allies imposed sanctions against Russia following the clashes between the U.S.-backed government in Kiev and pro-Russian forces in eastern Ukraine. Now, Russia was accused by the U.S. of being behind the crisis in Ukraine, but of course they denied those allegations.
Next was NATO's eastward expansion, even though Moscow emphatically stated it will not tolerate the presence of the Western military alliance near its borders. Then came the Russian airstrikes targeting terrorist groups in Syria. This move enraged the U.S. and NATO allies, which had already been conducting airstrikes in Syria without a UN mandate and without permission from Damascus.
German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier warned of the severe repercussions against the situation that he referred to as even more dangerous than the Cold War by saying Moscow and Washington knew each other's red lines and respected them. In a world with many regional conflicts and dwindling influence of the great powers, the world becomes more unpredictable.
International relations and security analyst Mark Sloboda said this is in many ways worse than the Cold War. The Cold War did have a global scope. This is more restricted, tighter to Russia and China's borders and several flashpoints like Syria and Ukraine. Just last month, U.S. State Department spokesman Tim Kirby revealed Washington's decision to end the joint peace process with Moscow, saying that there was nothing left to talk about with the Russians.
Now, the U.S. and its allies are considering imposing a no-fly zone in Syria in an apparent effort to halt Russia's air campaigns targeting the terror groups fighting against the Syrian government. Mark Svoboda explained how this move would be viewed. He said, "We have seen the results of similar no-fly zones in Serbia and more recently in Libya. It is well understood that a no-fly zone enacted unilaterally would, without the approval of the UN Secretary Council, is a capital crime. It is aggression. It is an act of war." So if they go that route, they're saying the U.S. is going to take it to the next level. It's going to be considered an act of war.
That's right. Interesting. Well, Russia is deploying its S-300 and S-400 anti-missile defense systems in Syria to counter any possible threats. Russian officials have also warned that there may be no time for a hotline discussion with the Americans about stealth aircraft or incoming missiles. So basically no time for talks when these buttons are pushed, meaning anything in the air will be shot down.
And of course, Katan, if we did have this type of incident, that would mean that these two nuclear-powered nations would be that much closer to an all-out confrontation.
That's right. Well, we close today by asking, what are the rich and famous doing with their money as they plan for the future? Well, believe it or not, building underground bunkers. That's right. Rising S Bunkers, a company that specializes in fancy underground bunkers, have increased a whopping 700% this year, according to Gary Lynch, the company's owner.
Actors, pro athletes, and politicians are all investing in high-end bunkers, some of which include, amongst other things, bowling alleys, saunas, jacuzzis, shooting range, swimming pools, game rooms, gyms, greenhouses, and massive home theaters. But at a price tag of around $10 million or more, it's a little out of reach for the average person.
It kind of makes you wonder what they're thinking about in the time of nuclear war, obviously, that they're wanting to be bowling and swimming down the
They want to be comfortable.
I guess. But who else is concerned? The end may be near, the end of the world. Well, billionaire Bill Gates reportedly has huge bunkers under every one of his homes. Pro athletes are also big customers, but maybe some of the most interesting customers on the list for high-end bunkers are the politicians.
The irony, though, the politicians don't want anyone to know that they're building bunkers, actually making the contractors sign non-disclosure agreements. Now, the bunker makers say all their clients, whoever they are, think we're doomed, no matter who's elected President of the United States. If all these politicians are planning on a bleak future, you really have to ask yourself, what are we paying them for? Well, you might not have an extra $10 million laying around, but don't worry. That's not where your protection comes from. Believe it or not, it's actually free. There's only one power that has the ability to save you from the destruction that's soon to take place on this earth, and it won't cost you anything except your obedience. Contact the House of Yahweh to find out more, and when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
You can contact the House of Yahweh by writing the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494 or visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yisroelhawkins.com, www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. You can also email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And of course, don't forget the best study resource to the Holy Scriptures, the Israel Says program. You can find that by going to www.yisraelsays.com.
Well, once again, get ready to clap and cheer. Up next is Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.